Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing the Conquest of Shuhan Let's Talk Lore series with episode 7, titled Liu Shan's Surrender. Before we get started, here's the answer to our trivia question from the end of our last episode, and be sure to stay tuned until the end of this episode for a brand new trivia question. Now, last time we ended with the conclusion of the Battle of Mianzhu, where Deng Ai and the Wei forces were able to overpower a valiant Shuhan defense led by Zhuge Zhan. And when news of the defeat at Mianzhu and the death of Zhuge Zhan, along with the entire Shuhan reserve forces, made its way back to the Shuhan imperial court, a fierce debate erupted between officials over Shuhan's next steps. Some suggested that the court, along with Emperor Liu Shan, should immediately make way for the kingdom of Wu to take refuge away from the approaching Wei forces. Others argued that instead of fleeing to another kingdom, they should simply flee south to the 6 southern commanderies in Nanzhong, where the jungle terrains and the local garrison will offer protection from the Wei invaders. Others asked Emperor Liu Shan to stay in Chengdu, as there were still troops here ready to defend the well-fortified city. Furthermore, General of the Right, Yan Yu, and his eastern forces were well on their way back from Yong'an. General who pacifies the south in Huo Yi, who commands the southern commandery garrison forces, had also written back to the court that the southern garrison were ready to march to defend the capital. An envoy from the kingdom of Wu has also reported back that the Wu Emperor Sun Xiu had already ordered General Ding Feng to launch an attack against the Wei positions at Shouchun, while also sending General Ding Feng and Sun Yi to reinforce Shuhan from the east. But none of these voices could win out against the advice from official Qiao Zhou, as Qiao Zhou represented a large majority of the court in asking Emperor Liu Shan to consider surrendering immediately to the Wei invader without further resistance. Now, Qiao Zhou came from a very poor but highly educated family in the Shu region. His father was a scholar of the Confucian text Shangshu and also dabbled in traditional fortune telling through the studying of the Han text He Tu Wei. And while his father would pass away when Qiao Zhou was only a child, which contributed heavily to why Qiao Zhou would grow up in poverty, his father did leave behind a vast volume of books that Qiao Zhou was able to consume and learn from. And when Zhuge Liang was the prime minister, Qiao Zhou was selected by Zhuge Liang to become the head of the provincial education, despite the fact that Qiao Zhou was so poor that during his first meeting with Zhuge Liang's attendants bursted out into laughter at Qiao Zhou's tattered clothing. But Qiao Zhou was an excellent Confucian scholar and an even better debater, as his fame would soon spread throughout the Shuhan territory. And many of the younger generation scholars turned Shuhan officials and later Jin officials from the Shu region, such as Wen Li, Li Mi, Luo Xian, and Chen Shou, were all students of Qiao Zhou. And as an interesting side note, Chen Shou also happens to be the later Jin court historian and the author of the Records of the Three Kingdoms, and I will have a special Let's Talk Lore series covering his life and writings of the Records of Three Kingdoms in the near future. Luo Xian will also make an appearance in the final episode of this current series, as he will play a vital role in the defense of Yong'an following Shuhan's surrender. But back to our topic at hand, as Qiao Zhou, who represented the majority voice at court, offered his reasonings to Liu Shan in regards to why it would be best for Shuhan to surrender immediately. First, Qiao Zhou countered the arguments about fleeing to seek refuge in Wu, as he argues that once you take shelter under another emperor, then you will no longer be an emperor. It is the simple fact that the big will absorb the small, and by the same logic, Wei is the bigger power compared to Wu. So one day in the future, Wei will absorb Wu as well. And at that time, we would all become the people who surrendered and got absorbed twice. And our treatment for that second surrender will become much worse, as Wei would no longer have to show mercy at that time. If we surrender to Wei now, with Wu still in the picture, then the kingdom of Wei would be forced to show us leniency, and hand us all titles, including high nobility titles for the former emperor, as they would need to use us to weaken the resolve of the Wu defense in the future. As for the idea of fleeing south into the 6 southern commanderies in the Nanman lands, Qiao Zhou argued that if preparations were made ahead of time, then certainly the terrains of the untamed south will offer protection against the Wei invaders, but such preparations never happened. For years, the local tribes that made up the majority of the population in these 6 southern commanderies have largely remained loyal to the kingdom, mainly due to the show of strength during the former Prime Minister Zhuge Liang's Nanman expedition. And even then, we still see minor uprisings and rebellions from time to time. So if we were to flee there at a time of our weakness, there is no guarantee that these tribes would continue to remain loyal. Our presence in their land would also cause an economic strain for the locals, which will only increase the likelihood of conflict. Furthermore, the threat of the Wei invaders, or perhaps even the enticement or bribery from the Wei side, can also easily turn our shelter into a death trap, and thus fleeing south is also a terrible idea. As for the option to defend Chengdu to the bitter end, Qiao Zhou argued that, looking back in history, emperors who surrender their position to one deemed more capable are only following destiny, and there is no shame in acceptance and no glory in turning Chengdu into a martyr for a lost cause. Now, you have to understand that by this time, the Shuhan imperial court was mostly void of staunch Shuhan loyalists. Hawks such as Jiang Wei and his officers were still trapped at Jiange, still desperately trying to hold back Zhonghui's assault. The few surviving veterans from Liu Bei's time, such as Liao Hua and Zhang Yi, who were already in their 70s or fast approaching that age, were also away from Chengdu as they too were with Jiang Wei at Jiange. The crop of capable second generation or third generation officers and court officials that leaned towards continued resistance, headed originally by Zhuge Zhan, had already all made their last stand, as their not yet cold bodies were still scattered amidst the smoldering ruins of Bianzhu. So the only person to speak out at court against Qiao Zhou's argument would end up being Liu Shan's 5th son, Liu Chen, who simply made the plea to his father that even if this would truly become the end of the road for the Han dynasty, then it is even more important for fathers and sons to band together and make this final stand. Even if we were to fail and die fighting, at least we will have no shame when we meet our forefathers and founding Emperor Liu Bei in the afterlife. But sensing that the court had already made up its mind, Liu Shan in the end agreed with Qiao Zhou's analysis, as Liu Shan would dismiss his enraged son, Liu Chen. Liu Shan would go on to order Qiao Zhou to officially form a delegation with officials Deng Liang and Zhang Zhao to travel to Mianzhu and offer the imperial seal to Deng Ai as a sign of surrender. When this was officially settled, the disgruntled prince of Beidi, Liu Chen, would return home to his estate, change into full white mourning clothes, brought his wife and sons with him, to the shrine of Liu Bei, where he would first help his wife and son commit suicide before taking his own life in front of his grandfather's shrine, as he did not wish to be alive to witness the final surrender of Shuhan. And with Liu Chen's suicide and Liu Shan's surrender, it would seem that the conquest of Shuhan is officially over. But we're actually far from being done, as Jiang Wei still had a force of 50,000 troops, and the Wu reinforcement were also already on their way. So to find out what will happen next, come back next time, as we'll continue our series tomorrow. Now, hopefully, you all have enjoyed this episode enough to consider subscribing to the channel for more content on Three Kingdoms history, or simply support the channel by leaving a comment below, or just by hitting the like button. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye!